also like at the beginning to thank DFAT for assisting us in organising today's event. We're very grateful indeed and very excited to be hosting someone who is so eminent in India. One of the wonderful things about working at the Australia-India Institute is that we get to host and meet a series of people who are having a really major effect on transforming contemporary India. And I can think of no one who fits that description better than the speaker and our guest this evening, Mr Amitabh Kant. As I've just said, he is the Chief Executive Officer of NITI-Aayog, the National Institute for Transforming India, which was established in April 2016. Well, he's been working there since April 2016. NITI-Aayog was established a year earlier in 2015. This is the official policy think tank of the Government of India. It's tasked with catalysing economic and social development through developing a set of strategic priorities and through encouraging competitive federalism in India. It's an absolutely crucial body. Prior to this, Mr Kant served as Secretary of India's Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, where he oversaw the development of industrial policies to drive economic development and growth. He led the drive to attract foreign direct investment into India, and he was extremely successful in improving India's ease of doing business ranking, one of the great achievements of the last 4 years. He has been a key driver, thinker, innovator in relation to a whole series of programs that students and faculty here at the University of Melbourne study and engage with, programs like Make in India, Start Up India, Incredible India, which is the brainchild of Mr Kant. And he's also an accomplished author. Many of you will know his book, Branding India, An Incredible Story. It would take me the next hour to list all of the forms of recognition and awards that you've received, sir. And I think while that would be very interesting, it's not what we're here for. But I do want to just say a few. Mr Kant's been awarded the Economic Times Policy Change Agent of the Year Award, the Bloomberg TV Personality of the Year Award, the NDTV Administrator of the Year Award, and he's a Distinguished Fellow of the Institute of Directors, among a number of other forms of recognition and prizes. The last thing I'd say is that one of the things that really I find very interesting and attractive and important about your writing and your work is the way that you've emphasised the importance of India as a place of hospitality and the idea of the guest as God, as a driver not only in terms of tourism, but thinking about India's relationship to the world more broadly. So without further ado, I'd like you to take the stage and invite you to present to us this evening. And thank you again for honouring us with your presence.
Great, thanks for that wonderful introduction. Deputy Vice Chancellor, the Council General, Mr. Pandey, my distinguished colleague, Anna. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure and an honor for me to be here in this institute and in this university, welcomed by the Australia-India Institute. This is a very, very distinguished University of Australia and a very great center of excellence, and I'm really honored and delighted to be here. Ladies and gentlemen, the topic here is 83 not out. India's march to a 10 trillion economy, because India had won, we had gone with a totally unheralded and unknown cricket team which went on, led by Kapil Dev, to win the World Cup cricket tournament in 1983 at Lord's. And in 2030, India will be 83 years old as a democracy. And to our mind and our analysis, India would be pretty close to being a $10 trillion economy. If you go by the Standard Chartered latest analysis, India's nominal GDP will then be about 46 trillion. India would have by then lifted a vast segment of its population above poverty line. Just about 5% of the people would be below poverty line, and India would actually be not a bottom of the pyramid economy, but would essentially be a middle class economy. And it will be an economy which will be totally driven by internet in many ways, and it will be an economy where a lot of technological innovations would have taken place. So ladies and gentlemen, the challenge really for India, which is today growing at about 7.5%, it's growing at about 7.5%, to accelerate its growth and to take it to a level of 9 to 10% per annum, year after year, for 3 decades or more. And this is critical because if India is to lift a very, very young population above the poverty line, the average age of India is just 29. Its average age around 2030 would be about still 32, whereas China would be 43, America would be about 45, and therefore India is passing through a window of demographic transition which rarely happens in history. It has very light dependency burdens, and rarely does a country not create wealth when it has such light dependency burdens. And therefore, what does India need to do to accelerate the pace of its growth and grow consistently for 3 decades or more at high rates of 9 to 10%? So ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, to my mind, India had over the years made itself a very, very complex, a very complicated, and a very difficult place to do business in. It was extremely difficult to do business in, and I've been in government I've been a civil servant for over 40 years, so I can honestly tell you this, that India and the Indian states were difficult to do business in. One of the key things this government, the Modi government, did in the last 4.5, 5 years was to put focus on making India easy and simple. And a number of rules, regulation, procedures, paperwork were done away with. Departments were made to speak digitally to each other and speak to the citizens and to the investors digitally. And therefore, close to about 1,300 laws were scrapped, vast numbers of rules, regulation, procedures were done away with, and therefore India has jumped up about 65 positions in the World Bank ease of doing business, but much more is in the offing, and our ambition is that in the next 3 years, India should reach the top 25 of the World Bank ease of doing business, and this would require a lot of sustained effort in the next 3 years. But India is a very large country. It's bigger than 24 countries of Europe, plus another 30,000 kilometers, and therefore in a large country like India, much like the federal polity of Australia, much of the investments takes place in states, and therefore how do you make states easy and simple? This was the challenge. And they've also added a huge number, plethora of rules, regulation, procedures. And therefore, we started working on outcomes, and we started working in partnership with the states to rank them, to make them compete. And we said that we'll put this in public domain. So the first year we did this, Gujarat came number 1. The very next year, Andhra beat Gujarat. And the third year, a new state like Telangana beat both Andhra and Gujarat. But the good thing was that the mineral-rich states of Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, which are full of resources to our mind, they carried out vast reforms and came 4th and 5th. And my belief is, if naming and shaming and if competition can spur growth in the eastern part of India, then you'll accelerate growth in India. And therefore, we've carried this business of naming and shaming and ranking of states from ease of doing business to education to health to ranking district hospitals and many, including water management, and putting it out in public domain so that people get to know as to which state is doing well, and their politicians and administrators are held accountable for non-performance. So first and foremost was to make states easy, make India easy and simple. The second key issue, the second key challenge to my mind was that India had to necessarily become an integral part of the global supply chain. Global production takes place in different parts of the world. It's designed somewhere else. It's manufactured somewhere else, assembled somewhere else, and therefore, unless India doesn't become a very integral part, it will not be possible for India to grow at high rates for a long period of time. And therefore, we opened up our foreign direct investment regime at a point of time when the rest of the world was talking about protectionism. We opened it up in a big way across sectors: insurance, pension fund, retail, many, many areas we opened up. Real estate, every single sector of India's economy we opened up. The only sector we kept at 49% was defense. But every other sector we opened up, and almost 98% of India's foreign direct investment comes now through the automatic route that you don't require any clearance, you just inform the Reserve Bank of India. And India's FDI in the last 4 years have grown by 66% at a point of time when FDI across the world has fallen by 16%. And therefore our belief is that if you open up more and more, you'll attract more and more FDI, and the world is looking around for opportunities to create more wealth, and therefore India needs to continue this process of opening more vigorously and promoting and marketing itself, irrespective of the protectionism around the world. Because India has this immense ability to attract investments because of its size and scale of demand. And therefore, India must necessarily, across sectors, become a very integral part of the global supply chain. The third key thing to my mind is, if India is to grow at high rates for a long period of time, urbanization will be the biggest challenge India will be confronted with. Every minute, there are 30 Indians who move from rural areas to urban areas. And if you go by the latest McKinsey study, there are over 500 million Indians will move from rural areas to urban areas by 2050, and this will be the biggest march towards urbanization. The process of urbanization has ended across America, it's ended across Europe, it's nearing its completion, last stages of its completion in China, whereas in India it's just begun. And India will do more urbanization in the next 5 decades than what it has done in the last 5,000 years. In America and Europe, when urbanization happened, land, gas, water were all cheaply available. And because they were cheaply available, as was the case in Australia, because they were cheaply available, Americans had the luxury of creating sprawling cities, like you did in Canberra. You copied the American model and you created sprawling cities. And therefore, Americans created Atlanta, where 99.8% of the people travel by cars. Nobody walks, nobody cycles. And therefore, American cities were made for cars and not for people. And they had big limousines, so you could live in New Jersey, travel to New York, guzzle gas. When the process of urbanization started in India, land, gas, water are all scarce commodities. All scarce commodities. And therefore, the challenge for India is how to do sustainable and innovative urbanization on the back of public transportation, which is compact, which is dense, which is vertical, but is extremely livable. And if India is able to create a model of good, sustainable and innovative urbanization, that has the possibility of becoming the new model for the rest of the world. But it has to be necessarily on the back of good public transportation. Therefore, that urbanization will really be the key of how India recycles its water, how India recycles its waste, how it does public transportation. And this really, to my mind, would be the key. The fourth point I want to touch upon is that India's carried out massive structural reforms in the recent period. In the last 4 to 5 years, some very massive structural reforms have been carried out. First and foremost, the goods and services tax. It's one tax across the economy. India had very cascading impact of 17 different taxes of states, octroi, and many other. And there used to be long waiting lists, lines of lorries and buses at state boundaries when they used to cross from one state to another. All this is over. We have a one-tax economy across India, and therefore this has led to the formalization of the Indian economy, and actually it has led to doubling of the number of taxpayers. both on the direct tax and indirect tax, you'll see a huge growth in the coming years. And therefore, to my mind, the second key reform, other than GST, has been the end of crony capitalism in India with the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code coming in. And this was a long, big, to my mind, this is even bigger than the goods and services tax. But what it's done is that in India, you had large companies either borrowing from financial institutions or not paying back, or not putting their own equity and not repaying institutions. And therefore, many of the financial institutions were going bust. What India did was to bring in a very, very hard insolvency and bankruptcy code with the National Company Law Tribunal, which ensures that within 270 days, you have to either go bust or you move forward with settlement. And therefore, this bringing in of financial discipline through the insolvency code will really strengthen the financial sector over a period of time, and has totally ended many entrepreneurs, many large companies which have not paid have lost their businesses in recent times. And therefore, this will bring in a huge discipline in the long period. The third key reform has been the RERA, which is the Real Estate Act, where many middle-class people who work in government actually or otherwise have bought properties but were never got their properties because the construction agency or the real estate player never built it for them or left half-completed houses, and therefore the Real Estate Act has again brought in a lot of discipline in the construction in the real estate sector. Now these are structural reforms. They've had teething issues, they've been major upsetting the status quo, but in the long run, they are all key reforms for India's growth, and therefore the spin-off of this will start happening 2 years down the line and will take India's GDP to a very high level because it will bring in discipline. The fourth key reform which has been carried out is the introduction of the direct benefit transfer. Every Indian has a biometric. We're the only country in the world where every Indian has a biometric, every Indian has a bank account, and there was a mass campaign to open bank accounts for everyone. And every Indian has a bank account and every Indian has a mobile. About a decade back, I was working in the fisheries sector of Kerala, and my job was to improve livelihood of traditional fishermen. And then they used to get just about 28% of the market price of fish. We introduced outboard motors. They could go much further into the sea. We introduced new fishing nets. They could get better catches. We got them fiberglass crafts, but opening their bank accounts was a nightmare. We introduced beach level auctioning. Opening their bank account, know your customer, was a nightmare. Impossible. It used to take me 8 months, 9 months to open a bank account for a traditional fisherman. Today in India, you open a bank account in 55 seconds flat. 55-second flat by putting your biometric. And therefore, between 2014 and 2017, according to the World Bank, 55% of the bank accounts opened across the world were in India. 55% of the bank account. And therefore, every Indian has a bank account. So what the government has done is, unlike my time in government, when money used to be transferred from central government to the state governments to district to panchayat, and one of our prime ministers said that there used to be only 15%, 15 paisa in a rupee used to reach the actual beneficiary. Today, the entire amount gets transferred straight into the bank account of the beneficiary, and he's able to withdraw it using his biometric. And therefore, Government of India has removed, in all the government schemes, removed fake beneficiaries, removed duplicates, everything through the biometric, and has actually saved Government of India over 90,000 crores of rupees. That's a vast sum of money which can go into all anti-poverty measures. But a huge amount of savings, and India has become productively a very efficient economy simply because of the use of the biometric of the bank account and using it to transfer money straight into the bank account. And therefore, it's had a huge impact in terms of productive efficiency. And therefore, these structural reforms, these major structural reforms will start to pay big dividends in 2 years down the line. The fifth point I want to make is that India is seeing a tremendous energy, vibrancy, and dynamism of its startup movement. When we started the startup movement in 2016, most of our startups were either going to Silicon Valley or they used to go to Singapore. We are now seeing a reverse trend of many of these startups coming back to India because we've been able to create a huge ecosystem around this in terms of easiness, simplicity, taxation, many intellectual property, many things. And therefore, we have close to about 20,000 startups. And many of them doing some very unique work. It's not merely that Flipkart was bought over by Walmart for close to 20 billion US dollars, but one of our startups, Oyo, has created more inventory of rooms in 5 years' time than what Taj, Oberoi, and ITC did in 100 years in India. And has now got into China, into Saudi Arabia, into UK, called the Oyo Rooms. Young man of 29 years, college dropout. Look at Ola, which has taken on Uber in the Indian market, as far as shared movement is concerned. Not only it's beaten Uber black and blue in the Indian market, but it's now got into UK and into Australia. All these are young. I mean, they demonstrate. I was watching the T20 cricket match, and I've never seen the kind of batting which Dhoni and Hardik Pandya displayed. I mean, the aggressiveness. I mean, Hardik Pandya scored 91 runs in 27 balls. Unbelievable. I mean, it was scintillating batting of the kind I've never seen before. Or Dhoni scored 86 runs in 27 balls. Unparalleled. So this is the aggressiveness of the young India. And Indian young entrepreneurship is absolutely top class. I talked about some of these, but there's a young girl called Pranshu Bhandari who started off by teaching Chinese, Mandarin, and Japanese, and then discovered that the market is not for Mandarin and Japanese, and then started an app called Hello English, and taught 9 million Indians how to speak English in 1 year. 9 million. No school, no college has been able to do this. There's another girl called Aditi who runs a startup called Imbibe. And she started tracking students like we track Uber cars, longitudinally, latitudinally, and then tracked every single student in the state of Rajasthan on how they've performed, and then started giving extra doses of education to those who were lagging behind, and all using data, machine learning, artificial intelligence. And her artificial intelligence model has led to a huge improvement in learning outcomes in the state of Rajasthan. Or look at Ather Energy, young boys passed out of IIT, who have, from IIT Chennai, who started their new scooter, electric scooter, smart electric scooter in Bangalore, which has the potential to be the Tesla of the scooter world. Because 70% of Indians use two-wheelers. And this guy has created one of the most smartest scooters you can ever come across. Or look at Sadshow, or look at Valsa, which are giving information to our farmers on what seeds and fertilizers to put depending on soil and weather conditions on a real-time basis and enhancing productivity. So the kind of disruption which many of these startups are causing in India is unbelievable, and it's an unparalleled movement of allowing a new ecosystem to be created, which is very different from my time. When I was growing up, there was no alternative but to join a government. But today, I mean, you talk to IIT director in Mumbai and he says 60% of the students who passed out last year either did their own startup or joined a startup. So many of you who've come from India to Australia, it's a different India today, totally different India. And it's important to recognize that these young Indians are here to do business, to do startups. They may fail once, they may fail twice, which my parents never accepted, but today parents, teachers, everybody is accepting that failure is a part of the story of India growing and evolving. And therefore, many of these startups who've done remarkable work have either failed once or twice, but have made remarkable breakthroughs in new businesses. The sixth point I want to touch upon is that actually there's a lot of technological leapfrogging happening in India. And this is happening simply because we've bypassed the fixed phones. We've never had fixed phones. We've just gone on to mobile. We've gone on to biometric. And what it has done is that it has enabled because of biometric and mobile telephony. India is using a lot of mobile connectivity to do a lot of things. India has suddenly gone digital. So if you look at the goods and services tax, it's totally digital. It's paperless, cashless. The direct tax of India, income tax, is 99.6% of Indians pay tax online, direct. Nobody gives it on paper now. And 96% of it is settled within a period of 3 months. The new Ayushman Bharat scheme, the health insurance scheme launched by the Prime Minister, covers 500 million Indians. 500 million Indians. And that's more than the population of USA, Europe, and Mexico put together. Totally paperless, cashless, portable. I'm living in Bihar, I can move to Kerala, but I can carry my insurance scheme. It's all digital. And look at the public finance management system of the government where I work. Every single transaction that I do is tracked digitally till the last point. It's all digital. And therefore, what India has done is that it has created this vast amount of data through different usage, and it has become data rich before it has actually become rich. India is not yet rich, but it is data rich. And this data richness is leading to a lot of machine learning, artificial intelligence, and fintech, a whole revolution in fintech. And the young, over 1,000 fintech startups are driving data, they're driving financial inclusion, and the days of physical banks and the days of physical bank managers is all dead and gone. There will be no physical banks and there will be no physical bank managers. It will be all mobile driven, all mobile driven. And therefore, in the last about 15 months, I have not used my debit card, credit card. I only use it when I come to Australia. I've not used it. I've not used an ATM machine. I've used the BHIM app, the Bharat interface for money app. And what India has done is it's created public entities. It's created public highways. Unlike America, where data is owned by Google and Facebook, and unlike China, where it's owned by Alibaba, Baidu, and Tencent, all private entities, in India, data is owned by public entities. It's owned by Aadhaar, it's owned by GST, it's owned by Ayushman Bharat. And on the top of that, we've allowed a lot of young entrepreneurs and a lot of private sector to do innovation. So it's private innovation on the back of public infrastructure. So Google Pay, Samsung Pay, Paytm. Look at what Paytm has done. 350 million acquisition of customers. 350 million. What took State Bank of India 110 years? Paytm has done it in exactly 2 years. This is the quantum jump. PhonePe. PhonePe has done 150 million in something like 6 months. This is the space of the speed and scale of transformation. And the speed at which it is happening is unparalleled and phenomenal. And therefore, many of these startups are innovating on the back of these public highways, and we are putting out more and more data in public domain for academicians and researchers, and for many startups to do innovation. And therefore, to my mind, a lot of innovation will happen, and therefore we have 400 startups doing work on artificial intelligence and machine learning will actually lead to a lot of people below poverty line being lifted on the basis of data and analytics rather than being dependent on bank managers. You will not be chasing bank managers anymore. It will be just data speaking, and it will be just data analytics and machine learning speaking. The seventh point I want to make is that actually a lot of innovation for the world is happening in India. A lot of innovation is happening. So if you go to places like Bangalore, Hyderabad, Pune, you'll find that Microsoft's Bing was innovated in India. You'll find Honeywell's turbocharger was innovated in India. You'll find that GE's low-cost ECG machine, which they used to manufacture for $35,000 in USA, and every ECG used to cost $35. They were able to do it for $3,500. And they're able to do an ECG for $1. From $35, they've come down to $1. Innovation in India. The entire Samsung's 3G, 4G, 5G evolution has taken place in India. SAP is a top-class, world-class software company from Germany, but all its software development has taken place in India. On the fashion technology world, all the top fashion designers of the world use software developed in India. Or Shell's latest use of Indian waste to convert it into diesel and petrol at their facility in Bangalore, which they're commercializing now to BS6 standards, the most advanced standards, all happening in India. And therefore, what India has demonstrated is great ability to do innovation, to do frugal engineering at price points which the world had never seen before. And therefore, India has been the center for compact car manufacturing. Hyundai came into India looking for the domestic market, but today exports almost 60% of its production to the rest of the world. Or Daimler came looking for the domestic market, but is exporting almost 40 to 50% of its buses and lorries across the world. And if it wasn't for India, the world, particularly the Western world, would have never got medicine at the right price points, because India was able to do engineering and provide pharmaceuticals at the right price points to the rest of the world. And therefore, India has demonstrated its great ability to do innovation and combine it with skills to produce at the right price points. And therefore, my belief is that the market for many of these startups, many of these innovators, the market is not the 1.3 billion people of India, but the 7.5 billion people of the world who will be moving from poverty to middle class in the next decade and a half. And that's a large market, and that's what the world should be looking at. It's not the rich and famous, but being able to provide innovations and transformation for the people who have to be lifted and transformed. And that is what many of these people will be doing. The eighth point I want to make is that actually, while we've done this huge transformation digitally, India's essentially grown on the back of services sector. And India's lagged behind in creating good infrastructure. But a huge work has been done in infrastructure in the last 4 to 5 years. So you see 30 kilometers of urban roads. You see about 150 kilometers per day of rural roads. And we've just sold off some of the roads built by the National Highway of India to Macquarie to do its on a reverse BOT. So what the government did was to create infrastructure, but it's very bad in operation and maintenance, so it's selling off much of the infrastructure, private sector to step in and maintain and operate and do the tolling. And these projects are fully de-risked. They are de-risked, and therefore they are fully operational. And in airports we are bringing in private sector, and roads we are bringing in private sector. Many of these areas, our stadiums, etc., will bring in private sector. And what we've done is to drive infrastructure. So you're seeing today the development of 100 smart cities in India. We're the only country in the world driving 100 smart cities. We're the only country in the world driving 50 metros. We're the only country which is doing the dedicated freight corridor. Today it takes 14 days for goods produced in the northern part of India to reach the ports in the western coast of India. But by 2019 end, goods will reach within 14 hours on a container train which will only carry containers and goods and put them on the ports of Mudra, Pipavav and JNPT. So from 14 days to 14 hours will be the transformation. And same thing on the east corridor from Calcutta to Jalandhar. And the same thing with the high-speed train from Mumbai to Ahmedabad. And therefore, a vast range of projects are presently underway on ports, on roads, on highway, and therefore truly the transformation of India on physical infrastructure is taking place. The ninth point I want to make is that quite often in India we get into sunset areas of growth, and it becomes very difficult to penetrate markets if you are in an area which is very difficult to grow. But because of PM's own commitment to climate change and his commitment to do really take the leadership position as far as India's growth is concerned in a sustainable manner, we committed to 175 gigawatt of renewable power. And we are ahead of the curve of many countries in pushing for renewables. So we are seeing a massive movement in terms of renewables. The next big thrust is on electric cars. Not on electric cars, sorry. It's on electric vehicles, particularly on buses and particularly on two-wheelers and three-wheelers. And therefore, the biggest transformation that you will see in coming days will be on renewables, on transportation, shifting towards electricity, on charging stations, and on electric storage. And we are making a massive shift because of our conviction that India must grow, but grow with sustainability and grow with concerns for climate change. So you'll see a huge transformation. And therefore, India will be getting not into the sunset areas, but into the sunrise areas of the future. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have given you a perspective of what's happening on infrastructure, what's happening on transformation, what's happening on startup, what's happening in terms of ease of doing business, and where India is heading. But let me also tell you that there are several challenges which India is confronted with. And these are critical challenges, and it will not be possible for India to grow at high rates of 9 to 10% without confronting these challenges and overcoming these challenges. And the first and foremost challenge, to my mind, ladies and gentlemen, is India must focus on gender parity. In India's case, only 28% of the women work. The worldwide average is 48%. And unless and until India doesn't focus on improving learning outcomes for a girl, ensuring that they go through school and college education, and unless we are able to provide work for them, you can't grow by not providing job opportunities for half your population. And wherever we've given opportunities, women have outsmarted men in every single walk of life. Every single competitive exam, women have done better than men. They've performed better. And in my own college, which is the best college in Delhi, when I was studying there, it was 100% male bastion. When my daughter went there, 82% of the students in that class were just girls on sheer merit. And the college principal said that to remain co-ed, they must do 10% reservation for boys. It became a huge controversy. And then I went to Christ College in Bangalore, and I could only see girls and girls and girls. So I asked the vice chancellor, there are no boys here? So he said, no, sir, we give 15% extra marks to boys, but they're not able to compete with girls. So the more opportunities we give, and men have a particular responsibility to ensure that women get jobs, and they're put into positions of power. And therefore, gender parity is something which this government focused on, and through a program called Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, educate the girl child and make her rise, save the girl child. And I think it's had a huge impact, and many state governments provided cycles to children, to girls, so that they could go to school for long distances. Huge number of reforms have been carried out by state governments in ensuring that. The second key challenge to my mind is that it's not possible for India to grow. And if you were to look at the history of the world post-World War II, Japan, Taiwan, Korea, China, all of them grew on the back of exports. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, my belief is that it's not possible for India to grow at long periods of time without penetrating global economies and becoming globally competitive. And therefore, doing manufacturing to size and scale. And being able to get into areas, because one of the challenges in India today is not about growth only, it's also the commitment to grow with good quality jobs. India has been creating jobs, but it needs to create quality jobs, and therefore quality jobs. And therefore, one of the challenges for India is to manufacture with global competency and global competitiveness, and penetrate global markets and export. And India has to find its core competency sector and penetrate global markets. 5 or 6 sectors where it can penetrate global markets. And it's possible to do this because suddenly from 2 manufacturing factories, now we have 252 manufacturing factories of mobile telephony in India. We have the possibility of doing it in food processing, we have the possibility of doing it in textile, we have the possibility of doing it in gems and jewelry, many areas, but 5 key areas where India must penetrate global markets. And without that, it will not be possible. And the third key thing, to my mind, one of the big challenges for India is to truly transform its agriculture. India has done a lot for its agriculture sector, but there are some critical reforms. There are outdated laws of Essential Commodities Act and the PMS order, which really prohibits the movement of agriculture products across states, bringing in real-time information to the farmers across India so that if production has gone up in one state, he should be able to get the market price, because the agriculture sector is full of middlemen. He should be able to get the real price of what he's produced, bringing in better warehousing, better cold storages, and to my mind, bringing in better technology and contract farming and leasing out of land. All this is critical. This requires for very strong political and administrative leadership at the state level, because agriculture is a state subject, and many states must push for reforms in the agriculture sector. That is the real key. And because 58% of the population is dependent on agriculture, and if agriculture is transformed, you'll see many people moving out of agriculture into urban and manufacturing in many areas. But transforming agriculture sector for better jobs is a key, and this would require very hard-headed reforms in the coming years. The fourth key challenge to my mind is, if you were to look at the map of India, and the full map of India, you will find green spots in South India, you will find green in Western India, partly yellow in the northern part of India, and these areas do relatively well. The southern part does well in health, education, nutrition. The west does well. The northern part does well. But the eastern part of India, and if you were to look at, out of the 720 odd districts of India, if you were to look, you will find 115 districts of India which are the backward districts of India. We don't call them backward, we call them aspirational districts of India. But these districts, if you are not able to transform them, they will not allow you to grow at 9 to 10%. So one of the key programs of the Prime Minister is the Aspirational District Program of India. And on 49 indicators across nutrition, health, education, and skill, we work with these districts on real-time databases, and we make them compete like we are making states compete on ease of doing business on these indicators. So we created the base level, and we capture their change on a daily basis. On a daily basis, we capture their change through third-party data, and we put out their ranking. In every month, we award the district which has come number one, and therefore we've seen a radical transformation in the 115 districts of India. Major radical transformation on learning outcomes, on health outcomes, on infant mortality, maternal mortality, on nutritional standards, simply because our belief is that if you're able to use data, real-time basis, if you're able to create competition, and if you're able to challenge the states and the district collectors, they will all work with you to transform. The morale was low, we've been able to transform the morale, we've been able to fill up the posts of teachers, we've been able to fill up the posts of doctors, and we've been able to fill up the post of ASHA workers and the Anganwadi workers who take care of nutrition standards. And therefore, we've seen a huge transformation in these districts. And my belief is that this transformation will really be the key to transforming India. Without transformation of health, education, nutrition, it will be very difficult to transform India. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, while India has done several transformations, it has spearheaded change, it has spearheaded growth and prosperity in India, and it has some challenges, and these need to be overcome. And these are challenges which I have talked about. And I think the next government will truly focus on these challenges to take India to a trajectory growth of 9 to 10% growth over a 3-decade period. Let me conclude, ladies and gentlemen, with this 14th century Indian poet. He was a Muslim. His ancestry was Turkish. He wrote in the Persian language. A Muslim writing in Persian, ancestry was Turkish, living in India in 14th century India. And he counted himself to be the luckiest man to have been born and to have lived in India in 14th century India. And he said it was the greatest place on earth. And in Persian language he writes how exhilarating is this atmosphere of India. There cannot be a better teacher than the way of life of its people. If any foreigner comes by, he will have to ask for nothing, because the Indians treat him as their own and teach them how to smile like a flower. So ladies and gentlemen, these are very exhilarating times in India. And if you learn, study, or come to India, you'll only smile like a flower. Thank you very much.